To know more about PENTAX Medical's commitment to infection prevention, read more about our hygiene commitment on our website.
Now we come to the third speaker. We have Professor Sebastian from the UK live online, if all is correct. And Professor Sebastian is going to speak about sustainable endoscopy. Let's see if we have Dr. Sebastian online. I currently see Meredith, but that's also fine. Are we going to go with Meredith? There we have Professor Sebastian. Hello, Professor. How are you today?
I'm very good. Thank you, Ingmar. Thank you. Thank you for great to be here.
Okay, great. Well, I think you have quite a few slides on sustainable endoscopy, a very interesting topic and also a topic that's discussed a lot. So without further ado, I will give the floor to you and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you to PENTAX for the kind invitation. It's great to be here. Now, as a conflict of interest, I'm neither a climate activist or an environmentalist. I'm a gastroenterologist, but I want to show you why some of us have got interested in this concept of sustainable endoscopy and walk you through some of the steps which we are taking to make endoscopy more sustainable, and finally talk you through where and how industry partners such as PENTAX can play a role in sustainable endoscopy. Trying to move the clicker. Doesn't seem... Okay, the clicker is disabled. Would you mind moving to the next? Yes, okay. Why am I interested in sustainable endoscopy? Because I am really concerned about the climate crisis. This is a crisis which has not gone away. You know from the data that the global temperatures have risen by 1.1 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And we know from real world experience, for example, that in the UK, in the last few years, the rainfall has increased by fourfold, and also the temperature has touched highest temperatures recorded over the last decade is significantly higher than what was recorded in the past. So it is a problem which is still there. Next slide, please. Click again. So we have lots of slogans. This is from the UN, which basically said that there is a lot of waste in our oceans and we need to act on it. Next, please. And they also said that you can actually see plastic waste deep in the ocean. Next, please. And we can even see that from up in the sky, you can see plastic waste floating in the ocean. But 2 years after the UN first talked about this, we are still seeing tons and tons of plastic which is in the ocean. Next, please. Next, please. So we are simply waiting for a further big episode of harm which is going to happen to our environment soon after a COVID pandemic and what I would assume some economic hardships, but then we are completely forgetting about climate change. So do we have a role in this? Next slide, please. And why do we need to really talk about it? Why should we care as healthcare professionals? Because climate change from greenhouse gases is the #1 healthcare issue of the 21st century. Ironically, what we do in our healthcare is one of the major emitters of environmental pollutant, and that is indeed affecting human health. Next, please. And what about endoscopy? Endoscopy is indeed the third most hazardous healthcare waste generating department. Why is that? Next slide, please. Because we have a high throughput procedures. We do numerous procedures and we have multiple non-renewable waste streams. We have a resource-heavy contamination process and numerous hospital visits for patients and relatives for these procedures. So at every step, we have high carbon footprint in activities what we do. Next, please. And to put it into perspective, this is just a data from the US. If you take all the endoscopy, gastrointestinal endoscopies performed in US and take the waste produced as a result of this, it can cover 117 soccer fields up to a depth of 1 meter and will be equivalent to 24,000 odd passenger car journeys. Just think about it in real terms, how that is harming the environment. Next, please. So this is why we formed this advocacy group called Green Endoscopy. Myself and few of my colleagues from the UK and North America brought together this group, which we thought firmly that research and education is the vehicle in which we can enable, develop, collaborate, and minimize waste, and then make sustainable endoscopy a reality. Next slide, please. We progressed onto a number of work streams, including educating our healthcare professionals about the importance of thinking sustainably in endoscopy. We worked with organizations such as the British Society of Gastroenterology, the AGA in USA, and also the ASGE, and also the European Society of GI Endoscopy, to look at where we can reduce the carbon footprint of endoscopy. Next slide, please. And we went on the triple principles of reduce, reuse, and recycle. There is a reason why I have put reduce at the first, because I think the single most intervention we can do is to actually reduce the volume of procedures which we are doing, because an unnecessary procedure is the most important aspect of environmental harm, which may cause, not least to say, the harm potentially to the patient. Next, please. Next, please. So we marked the patient journey in an endoscopy department and found that at each and every step, starting from simple scheduling, considering alternatives in pre-assessment stage, at the procedure stage, and even at the follow-up stage, we can make single interventions based on these 3R principles of reduce, reuse, and recycle principles, and reduce the overall impact of endoscopy on the environment. Next slide, please. Just think about this plastic weight. This is what we see in endoscopy unit. It is always considered as unavoidable, but is it really? Just next slide, please. Next slide, please. You can see that the waste is can be easily segregated. If you actually really segregate it, in fact, it will be actually cheaper too. At least in the UK, you can put different waste in different streams, and the processing of these waste is charged differently. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And what about recycling? And sometimes even reusing when possible our own plastic waste. For example, if you think about face masks, aprons, vises, and curtains, all of these potentially can be recycled. And you have seen papers recently utilizing reusable gowns for theaters and endoscopy units. But these are all which are coming into our horizon, and this will help us to reduce our footprint. Next slide, please. This is one of the processes which we do in our own unit using this Sterimelt company, in which most of our plastic waste can be actually reused into creating a circular economy, producing plastic slabs which are used for making furniture, etc. So we can do recycle of most of the stuff what we do in our endoscopy unit. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And another simple step which can be done, this is from a small hospital in the UK, where an enthusiastic nurse put up a poster saying, can we think about recycling ideas? They came up with this different containers for various products which are used in endoscopy to clearly identify which goes where. That meant that the endoscopist or the assistant who are doing clearly knew that they can actually reduce the amount which is straight going into the landfill. Similarly, on the picture on the right, a simple intervention, that a plastic device, what is there, was used for storing the caps of endoscopes. But that wasn't really needed. It is already within a metal sheet, within the processing equipment. She recognized that and removed that. So just simple steps such as that has been our way of approaching this problem from the ground level. Next slide, please. But we need to think bigger, and that's why you are here. We and our colleagues from North America looked at mapping out the carbon footprint of the endoscopy unit per se. And we really found that the two areas of importance are in the reprocessing and washing of the scopes. Next slide, please. And the amount of water which is used for decontamination processes is huge. And whether RO water is required for all of these processes is also up for debate now. But what really concerns me is that pictures on the right-hand side with multiple 100 mil bottles of plastic. These are actually water which is used for flushing the scope while, or flushing the colon while you are having a colonoscopy. Is that really needed? Can we use filtered water to flush the colon while doing the procedure? Such small interventions will make difference, in my opinion. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. But we also need to go much higher. This is where I want your help with industry and supply chain. I think you should do your part. We need to hold you to account in relation to packaging and delivery, and also think about innovative models, how we can reduce the carbon footprint. Next, please. And this is already happening. Next slide, please. Some organizations here, for example, Boston Scientific, has actually put climate change as one of their key pledges as they develop new products. Next slide, please. And this is another thing, with this time from PENTAX, who have produced plasma typhoon system, which you have already heard from our previous two speakers. Next slide, please. Click, next slide, next slide, next slide. But what I am particularly interested is in the sustainability and efficiency of the plasma typhoon system. It does reduce the overall energy consumption and carbon footprints up to 25 tons. And we are going to evaluate this further in a multi-center study in the UK. And further, the next generation plasma bag, there is a commitment from the company that it will be pretty much completely recyclable. So these are the type of commitments from the industry which we as green endoscopy enthusiasts are looking for, and great credit to PENTAX for bringing this product out. Next slide, please. And then we will briefly touch upon single-use endoscope. I fully understand the concerns, and quite rightly so, about the risk of infections, particularly in certain high-risk procedures such as bronchoscopes, ureteroscope, and also in duodenoscope while doing ERCPs. However, I do feel that some parts of the industry have overblown this risk and have come up with a number of single-use devices, which I do have concerns in relation to the environmental aspect. Next slide, please. Just to look at this slide. this is a material components which are going to be going into the landfill from a disposable scope. If you look at overall manufacturing, only 48% of this product as a disposable scope can be recycled. So nearly 52% of this is going to landfill. We quantified this, we and our collaborators. Next slide, please. And you can see from this slide that if we change all the scopes, that's upper GI endoscopes, duodenoscopes, and colonoscopes, from reusable to single use, there is over 40% higher waste going to be produced. This is looking at all starting from production till actually disposal. So there is a 40% increase in waste from disposable single-use scopes compared to reusable scopes. Next slide, please. But can we counter? So this is another analysis which we have done, looking at the life cycle of the endoscope from manufacturing all the way to disposal. You can see at many steps, apart from the reprocessing or decontamination stage, you can see single-use scopes carry considerable environmental impact. So we need to think about innovative solutions to how we will reduce and create a balance between the addressing the risk of infections as opposed to the risk to the environment. I'm sure there will be a happy medium where we can come together as academics, endoscopists, and also manufacturers to reduce both of these aspects. Next slide, please. That is already happening. This is another kudos to PENTAX to come up with solutions such as disposable caps on duodenoscopes, which has significantly reduced the risk of duodenoscope-related infection. Other companies such as Olympus and Fuji has also followed suit. So we do have solutions which are aimed at managing this balance of risks. Next slide, please. And we actually looked at this and looked at the risk of transmissible infection in duodenoscopes versus the risk to the environment. And in a subsequent technical review conducted by the ASGE, they have clearly stated that at the moment the evidence stacking up in relation to the infection risk of reusable endoscopes with single-use endoscopes is still debatable, but at the same time, we also have to consider the environmental impact. And I was really pleased that ASGE has taken on our concerns to put that wording in their statement there. Next slide, please. So that is highlighted in that statement where they specifically mentioned the environmental impact. Next slide, please. So we do need to offer a power of choice. And this is where I have to congratulate PENTAX on providing solutions which will meet the needs of every patient. Professor Trisolini talked about the high-risk patients with bronchoscopes. Yes, there should be single-use bronchoscopes in that situation. There may be need for single-use duodenoscope in specific patients for undergoing ERCP, but wholesale change into single-use endoscope is not what I would propose. Next slide, please. So you can see PENTAX, quite rightly, with their environmental hat, has come in with the use. Next slide, please. With semi-disposable scopes, which has got various devices at the cap to reduce the risk of infections, but at the same time, less environmental cost. Next slide, please. And we already talked about the plasma typhoon. Next slide, please. So when we talk about single-use and reusable, I saw this on my travel recently. Yes, it is required, but it should be restricted, redesigned, and if not possible to redesign, to reduce the environmental impact, then I think we need to think again and perhaps remove the current products which are costing the environment from production. And I think that might sound controversial, but I do really think that it should be restricted to specific instances, the use of single-use scopes. Next slide, please. So in summary, you do have a role to play. It's no longer simply going back to business as usual. I think we do need to think about endoscopy as a community. Providers, the companies, manufacturers, accessory device product producers, most importantly, the frontline staff. We need to think about endoscopy and how we can reduce the carbon footprint of our endoscopic procedures. Because I do think that unless we do that, we won't be contributing to reducing climate change as wanted by the UN. Thank you for your attention.
So, Professor Sebastian, thank you very much for that clear presentation and some hard-hitting words here. So change is most definitely necessary. Just one question before we go into the next section. From your own personal experience, who do you think really needs to drive this project, this process forward, this topic forward? Are that the physicians, the policymakers? Is it hospital staff? Where do you think the needle is really going to come changing from?
I would say everyone. It's everyone's responsibility. Our planet needs all of us to act, but we all have a little role to play. And I'm hoping that industry will play their role with coming up with innovative solutions like what we have seen already today, which will make difference. But at the end of the day, it has to be coming from grounds up, the frontline staff. We have an empowered staff who actually seriously thinking about climate impact on healthcare interventions. And that's the key sector we need to work on.
Okay, thank you very much for your talk and your presentation, Dr. Sebastian.